And sometimes we'll need to factor out a monomial before we finish factoring. So to factor an algebraic expression, we start by looking for common factors in each of its terms. If there are factors common to each term, we can factor them out of each term. So here we have 6x squared minus 2x. Right, so each term has 2 as a common factor, and each term also has x as a common factor. When we factor 2x out of each term, we're going to divide 6x squared. So we would divide 6x squared by 2x, and we would divide negative 2x by 2x. You got to make sure that you write what you're dividing, because we're not getting rid of any terms, we're just rewriting it. Make sure you write what you're dividing by as one factor, and then you divide each of those terms by that factor. So 6x squared divided by 2x would be 3x, because the 6 divided by 2 is 3, and one of the x's would cancel. And negative 2x divided by 2x would be negative 1. So this expression cannot be factored any further. To be sure you factored correctly, you can always do the multiplication and see that you get the original expression. So if I multiply, I would be multiplying 2x times 3x, and I'd be multiplying 2x times negative 1. And that would, 2x times 3x would be 6x squared. 2x times negative 1 would be a negative 2x. So notice we get right back to the original expression. Right, let's take a look at some more factoring out monomials. So here we have one. Right? We want to factor a common monomial, 3a squared minus 12a. Right, so you have to figure out what the greatest common factor is. Right, so both of those are divisible by 3. And they're also divisible by a. So our greatest common factor is 3a. So we're going to factor 3a out of all of those out of those two terms. Right? So we have 3a. Right? So we have to write down. Right? So we're factoring out the greatest common factor, and when we write it down, we're going to make sure that we write it as a product of terms. So 3a is what we're dividing by. 3a squared divided by 3a would be a. And then negative 12a divided by 3a would be 4. And so, oops, I forgot a parenthesis there. So 3a squared minus 12a factored would be 3a times a minus 4. Here we have 27x squared minus 9x. They're both divisible by 9, and they're both divisible by x. All right, so that's our greatest common factor. So we're going to divide both terms here by 9x. 27x squared divided by 9x would give us 3x. Oops, I almost forgot to write down. Don't forget dividing by 9x. Right, so it would be times 3x, and negative 9x divided by 9x would be a negative 1. And then if we multiply it back, 9x times 3x would give us 27x squared. 9x times negative 1 would give us negative 9x. All right, so now we're going to look at some more where we have to factor out a common monomial, and then we're going to factor a quadratic expression. All right, so this one's in your notes. We want to factor out the greatest common factor. Our greatest common factor, all three of those terms, are divisible by 4. So we're going to rewrite as a product of the remaining terms. So 4 is 1, and then we're going to divide all three terms by 4. Right, so 4x squared divided by 4 would give us x squared. 24x divided by 4 would give us 6x. 36 divided by 4 would give us 9. Right, so now 4 is going to be one of the factors. Now it's just a constant factor, but we can put that at the end. We want to factor the rest. We want to factor the x squared plus 6x plus 9. Right, so to completely factor, we have to factor out the greatest common factor and then factor the rest. A is 1, B is 6, and C is 9. Right, so 1 times 9 is 9. We need two numbers that multiply to give us 9, but add to give us our B term of 6x. Right, of 6. Right, so multiplies to give us 9, adds to give us 6. That's got to be 3 and 3. Right, so we're going to replace that 6x with a 3x and a 3x. First two are a group, second two are a group. Right, so We'll factor out our greatest common factor. Greatest common factor from x squared and 3x is an x. Right? So x squared divided by x would give us x. 3x divided by x is 3. Greatest common factor for 3x and 9 is 3. 3x divided by 3 is x. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So we have our repeating x plus 3 and what we pulled out, which is x plus 3. So we could write this as 4 times x plus 3 times x plus 3. Or we could write it as 4 times x plus 3 squared, since we have the same factor twice. And that's all there is to it. So we're going to be factoring out a greatest common factor. That's just going to be a factor at the end. And then we're going to be factoring the resulting quadratic expression. All right, so here we want to factor negative 4x squared plus 2x plus 30. You always want your x squared term to be positive. It is easier to factor if x squared is positive. So instead of just factoring out a positive term, we're going to factor out a negative term. All of those are divisible by negative 2. So our greatest common factor is going to be negative 2. Right? So we're going to divide everything by negative 2. Right? So we have negative 2 times negative 4x squared divided by negative 2 is going to be a positive 2x squared. 2x divided by negative 2 is going to be a negative x. And 30 divided by negative 2 is going to be a negative 15. Right? So the negative 2 we'll deal with at the end. That'll just be one of our factors. And we want to factor the rest. So A is 2, B is negative 1, and C is negative 15. 2 times negative 15 is negative 30. We need two numbers that multiply to give us negative 30, but add to give us negative 1. So they have to be 1 apart. Right? That's got to be negative 6 and 5. They're 1 apart. And they multiply to give us negative 30 and add to give us negative 1. So we replace that negative x with a negative 6x and a positive 5x. Notice it still has the same value. It just looks different. The first two are a group. The second two are a group. Right? Greatest common factor for 2x squared and negative 6x would be a 2. Oops. I'm trying to write a 2 there and it came out all funky. A 2x. 2x squared divided by 2x is x. Negative 6x divided by 2x is a negative 3. 5x and negative 15, greatest common factor is 5. 5x divided by 5 is x. And negative 15 divided by 5 is a negative 3. All right, so the repeating x minus 3 is one factor. What we pulled out, the 2x plus 5, is another factor. And don't forget the negative 2 that we pulled out right from the beginning. All right, so there our expression here is completely factored. We've got three factors, negative 2 times x minus 3 times 2x plus 5. Okay? And this one is in your notes. And here we have another one. All right, we want to factor out the greatest common factor. Notice that our a term here is negative, so factor out a negative 5. Negative 5 would be our greatest common factor. Make sure your x squared is positive. All right, so negative 5 is going to be one factor, and then to get the others, the other factor, we're going to divide both terms by negative 5. Negative 5x squared divided by negative 5 is going to give us positive x squared. 5 divided by negative 5 is a negative 1. All right, so negative 5 is one of our factors. All right, and our a is 1. Notice there's no x term. That means b is 0, and our constant is negative 1. 1 times negative 1 is a negative 1. We need two numbers that multiply to give us a negative 1 and add to give us 0. They have to be opposites of one another, negative 1 and 1. All right, so x squared minus x will be one group, and x minus 1 will be the other. We can factor in x out of both of those terms. X squared divided by x would give us x. Negative x divided by x is negative 1. And the only factor that x and negative 1 have in common is 1. So x divided by 1 is x, and negative 1 divided by 1 is negative 1. All All right, so we have our repeating factor, x minus 1. What we pulled out, x plus 1, times negative 5. So notice x squared minus 1 is a difference of squares. Right? We have the same factor twice. The only thing that's different is that sign of that second term. Right? And there we are, all factored. And that's the end of this part of the lesson. So now you can move on to the classwork. Good job. Right? Thanks for watching. Bye for now.